Family conflict has always been a part of my life, but lately, things with my sister Rachel have reached a boiling point. With 5 children in our family, I find myself right in the thick of it. Rachel is the oldest at 24, while I'm the second youngest at 18, soon to turn 19. Our dynamic has been anything but smooth, largely due to the 5-year age gap that has created a rift between us. Instead of bonding, our relationship has often felt like a tug of war, with Rachel behaving as if I were just an irritating little sister she had to tolerate. Growing up, I often felt overshadowed by Rachel. She was the one who seemed to have everything figured out while I was still trying to navigate the maze of adolescence. Fast forward to this year, and the landscape of our relationship shifted dramatically when Rachel got engaged to her boyfriend, Mike. I should have been excited, but instead, I found myself dreading the inevitable changes that would come with this new chapter in her life. From the moment Rachel became engaged, the tension escalated. Whenever I tried to contribute to family discussions, like suggesting a movie for family night, Rachel would roll her eyes, dismissing my opinions as if they were inconsequential. It felt like I didn't belong, as if my voice was being silenced by the wedding planning storm that was about to hit. In June, Mike proposed in a way that could only be described as over the top. He organized a massive seaside event that featured enormous white letters spelling out, "Marry me," adorned with rose petals scattered across the beach. Our parents and all 5 siblings were there, including our younger brother, who was blissfully entertained playing in the sand. At that moment, everything seemed perfect, but the illusion shattered almost immediately. Once the engagement was official, Rachel morphed into a full-blown bridezilla. I had anticipated some tension, but nothing could have prepared me for the demands she began making. Being her sister, I was naturally invited to join the bridal party, which initially felt like a kind gesture. Little did I know, it would soon turn into a whirlwind of stress and absurd expectations. Right off the bat, Rachel made it clear that all bridesmaids were responsible for purchasing their own dresses. The blush pink gown she selected cost a staggering $300. While I tried to wrap my mind around the price tag, it felt like just the tip of the iceberg. She also insisted we buy matching shoes in the same shade. And to add to the financial strain, each of us had to cover our own hair and makeup costs. The stress of the situation was palpable, but my parents shrugged it off, insisting that this was just how brides could be nervous and demanding, but it would all work out in the end. Things took a turn for the outrageous when Rachel scheduled 2 extravagant pre-wedding parties, expecting all the bridesmaids to attend. First on the agenda was a spa day, which would set each of us back $800. Yes, you read that correctly, $800 for a day of pampering that many of us simply couldn't afford. It was hard to believe that my sister could even think of this as a reasonable expectation. Next came the bachelorette weekend, planned in none other than Toronto, at one of the city's most luxurious hotels, the Fairmont. Each bridesmaid was expected to pay $1,000 just for the hotel stay, not to mention airfare, food, or any other expenses that might arise during the trip. It was beginning to feel like Rachel was determined to financially drain all of us in the name of her wedding. Rachel also arranged several dress fittings, but her expectations went well beyond merely ensuring our dresses fit properly. She insisted that we show up for her cake and catering tastings, even though we were not part of those decisions. It felt absurd that our presence was deemed necessary for her to make choices that were entirely about her. To add insult to injury, each bridesmaid was responsible for paying $25 to attend these tastings. Then came the jaw-dropping news. Rachel announced that each wedding guest, including the bridal party, would have to pay $150 for a seat at her wedding. Yes, you heard me right. Not only did we have to fund our own dresses and accommodations, but we were also expected to pay to attend our own sister's wedding. Rachel had created a strict policy stating that anyone who didn't pay would not be allowed to attend. The entire situation felt unreal. In her meticulous quest for control, Rachel even devised a spreadsheet to track everyone's payments and gifts. She made it clear that anything not on her wedding registry would be returned without hesitation. As you can imagine, this made the bridesmaids, who were also my friends, extremely anxious. Each of them faced their own struggles to meet these relentless demands, and it was clear that Rachel was losing sight of what should have been a joyful occasion. While I tried to keep my head down and just get through it all, Rachel's incessant need for control only intensified. My mom kept advising me to let Rachel have her moment, insisting that it would all be worth it in the end. But as the days turned into weeks, I found myself increasingly overwhelmed by the madness. Rachel had even gone so far as to create a separate email account specifically for us bridesmaids to communicate wedding-related matters. However, none of the vendors, caterers, florists, or venue coordinators were allowed to reach out to her directly. Instead, all communication had to filter through us. It was as if Rachel expected us to read her mind and act as her personal assistants. The absurdity of the situation was not lost on me. We were supposed to know her wishes without ever questioning her. As the wedding planning spiraled further out of control, I could sense the stress it was placing on my parents. My mom, who had always defended Rachel's actions, was now overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of her demands. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, trying to maintain some semblance of sanity amidst the chaos. My dad seemed blissfully unaware, often out of the loop, while my mom potted Rachel on the back, making excuses for her increasingly erratic behavior. With each passing day, I wondered how long Rachel could maintain this level of stress without something giving way. It felt like every time I turned around, there was a new rule or expectation thrown into the mix. The financial burden and emotional strain were becoming unbearable, and I found myself questioning how I could support her while still managing my own life. Thinking back, I had assumed the worst of it would be the overwhelming costs: spa days, extravagant clothing, and the ridiculous requirements. But I was dead wrong. After confiding in some friends about how ludicrous everything had become, I was advised to approach Rachel directly. "Just talk to her," they said. "She may not realize how overwhelming this is for you." Feeling a mix of trepidation and determination, I decided it was worth a shot. One evening, I sat Rachel down and poured out my heart. I explained how overwhelmed I felt about the mounting expenses, the unrealistic expectations, and the overall sense of chaos surrounding her wedding. I thought surely she would understand, or at least acknowledge how difficult things were for me. Instead, Rachel responded with a dismissive shrug. "If you're struggling," she said with a condescending smirk, "maybe you need to prioritize better. This is my wedding, you just have to keep up." Her tone left me reeling. It felt as if all my feelings had been brushed aside, as if my struggles didn't matter in the grand scheme of her grand vision. From that moment on, things took a turn for the worse. Rachel decided that the bridesmaids' looks weren't up to her standards. She mandated a strict beautification routine that included not just hair and makeup appointments, but also bi-weekly facials, manicures, pedicures, and spray tans. All of this, of course, was to be paid for by us. The mounting pressure felt suffocating, but I was determined to stand by my sister, even as I felt my sanity slipping away. Then came the cherry on top of this wedding nightmare. Rachel, proud of her own tattoos, instructed the tattooed bridesmaids to cover up. "Clean and elegant," she demanded, as if our ink was somehow a blemish on her perfect day. I was baffled by the hypocrisy, She wanted to flaunt her tattoos while insisting we hide ours. It felt unfair and contradictory. One of my fellow bridesmaids, my cousin Leah, had a lovely wrist tattoo she had cherished for years. When Rachel suggested Leah either cover it with makeup or wear long sleeves, Leah was furious. Yet, in her desire to keep the peace, she reluctantly agreed to comply. The absurdity of Rachel's demands was enough to make anyone's head spin. Every day felt like a battle, and I was beginning to realize just how deep this rabbit hole went. I could see that Rachel was caught up in her vision of a perfect wedding, but at what cost? The pressure was mounting, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was going to end in disaster if things didn't change. As I navigated this minefield of expectations, I knew I had to find a way to reclaim my voice without tearing the family apart. But how could I do that when Rachel seemed so consumed by her vision of perfection? The chaos was just beginning, and I could only brace myself for what lay ahead. As I mentioned earlier, Rachel's choice of bridesmaid gowns was a whirlwind of chaos and absurdity. The dresses came only in sizes 0 through 10, which immediately set the stage for an uncomfortable confrontation. I'm a size 12, and as expected, I became the target of Rachel's unsolicited advice on weight loss. She sent me a book on the ketogenic diet, suggesting I slim down before the wedding. This wasn't just a casual recommendation, it felt like a demand, and it hit me like a punch in the gut. Being in a wedding party is stressful enough without your own sister body shaming you. I tried to brush it off, but Rachel's comments kept coming, each one like a little jab that left a mark. She would casually suggest that perhaps I should reconsider being a bridesmaid altogether if I couldn't fit into the dress. The notion that my worth as a sister and a bridesmaid was tied to my size felt utterly dehumanizing. You would think Rachel would realize how outrageous her expectations were, but instead, she seemed to thrive on this power trip. It was a slap in the face to be told to reserve a spot at her wedding for a $150 deposit. Yes, you read that right guests had to pay to attend. Rachel brushed it off as standard for high-end weddings. I asked her why she thought this was acceptable, but she merely shrugged, convinced that anyone who cared enough to be there would fork over the cash. As the wedding planning escalated, my ability to maintain my composure started to unravel. Even my parents, who had been relatively laid back throughout this fiasco, began to raise their eyebrows at Rachel's demands. Months of managing her expectations, enduring body-shaming remarks, and feeling the financial strain took its toll. I realized that for Rachel, nothing I did would ever be sufficient. It was all about her perfect day at any cost. One night, after yet another heated discussion about the dress sizes and my supposed lack of progress, I reached my breaking point. "I'm done," I declared, my voice steady but tinged with emotion. "I can't do this anymore. I'm not going to be in your wedding." Her response took me by surprise. Rachel looked at me, her expression a mix of disbelief and fury. She called me selfish and said I would regret my decision, framing it as if I was ruining her special day. But honestly, for the first time in months, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. I had finally stood up for myself. No wedding, no matter how elegant, was worth sacrificing my mental health and self-respect. Word of my withdrawal spread like wildfire, and suddenly, I was the villain in Rachel's narrative. My mother, always the peacemaker, tried to mediate. "You need to think about your sister," she insisted, her voice tinged with a desperate kind of urgency. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience." I tried to explain that it was more about Rachel's behavior over the past few months than about the wedding itself. I shared stories of body shaming, ridiculous demands, and how I felt like I was walking a tightrope every day. But my mother dismissed it, attributing it all to wedding stress. She doesn't mean any of it, she said, trying to soften Rachel's harshness. In that moment, it became painfully clear to me that this was about something much deeper than just the wedding. This was about family dynamics and the unhealthy patterns that had long defined our relationship. Rachel was launching a full-scale smear campaign against me while my mother tried to shame me back into the wedding party. Rachel's narrative was relentless. She began posting passive-aggressive updates on social media, targeting ungrateful family members who wouldn't sacrifice for love. Though she didn't name names, it was clear who she was referring to. She reached out to relatives, spinning the story to paint me as the greedy one who refused to contribute to her big day. Family members started texting me, asking what was happening. Some sided with Rachel without even knowing my side of the story. I was too emotionally drained to defend myself, so I let her say whatever she wanted. I figured that those who truly knew me would see through her lies, and those who didn't, well, I couldn't bring myself to care. After weeks of turmoil, my dad finally intervened. He had mostly kept to himself during this family mess, preferring to stay out of the drama. But it seemed like this was too much for him to ignore. "Let's talk," he said, his expression serious as he gestured for me to sit down. "I know your mom's been pushing you," he began, choosing his words carefully. "And I know Rachel's been difficult." He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "But I want you to know I'm on your side. You are free to decline this wedding if you want." Hearing those words felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in months, I felt validated. My dad continued, assuring me that he would talk to Rachel and my mom about how she was handling everything. It was such a relief to know I wasn't alone in this, and it gave me the strength to stand my ground. After his conversation with Rachel, things were relatively calm for a few days. I thought maybe she'd finally back off and let me be. But then, one evening, I received a call from my cousin Lily that sent me into a spiral of rage and heartbreak. "Rachel's been telling people that you're bitter because you're single," Lily explained hesitantly. "She's saying you don't want her to be happy." The absurdity of it all left me reeling. Jealous? Of Rachel? The idea was ridiculous, yet here she was, trying to discredit my reputation. This wasn't just petty wedding drama anymore. This was a conscious effort to undermine me as a person. I hung up, feeling the weight of betrayal heavy in my chest. How could my own sister stoop so low? I realized then that there would be no chance for peace between us. The damage had been done, and forgiveness seemed impossible. As the wedding day approached, the tension in our family escalated. I made it clear that I wanted nothing to do with the celebration, but my mother persisted, trying to convince me to come as a guest. Meanwhile, Rachel had completely cut off communication with me, which, oddly enough, was a comfort. My dad stood by me, reaffirming that I didn't have to go. I focused on my own mental well-being and tried to distance myself from the chaos. I spent time with friends, leaned into hobbies, and tried to remind myself that my worth wasn't tied to Rachel's approval or her extravagant wedding. Then came the day of the wedding. I woke up feeling a mix of dread and relief. I had decided to stay away entirely, choosing self-respect over familial obligation. But as the hours ticked by, I couldn't shake the anxiety. What would the aftermath of this decision look like? Eventually, I learned through social media that the wedding had gone off without a hitch, just as Rachel had envisioned. I scrolled through photos of her radiant smile, surrounded by the carefully curated bridal party, all in their perfectly fitting gowns. Each post felt like a dagger, a reminder of the rift that now lay between us. In the days that followed, the fallout continued. My family was divided, with some supporting Rachel's narrative, while others began to question her behavior. I received messages from relatives asking how I was holding up, and it became clear that my absence had not gone unnoticed. Despite the storm of emotions, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had stood up for myself when it mattered most, refusing to let anyone dictate my worth or my happiness. The process was painful, but I was beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Maybe Rachel would eventually come to terms with her actions, or maybe this was a fracture that would never heal. Either way, I had learned that my self-worth was not contingent on being a part of someone else's perfect day. I could finally focus on my own journey, a journey that promised to be far more fulfilling than any wedding ever could. After months of walking on eggshells and trying to avoid confrontation, Rachel's text to formally uninvite me from her wedding became the last straw. It read, "Since you obviously don't care about this family or my happiness, there's no point in you attending my wedding. On my special day, I want nothing negative." Reading those words, I felt a strange combination of relief and sadness. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control over my own actions. The decision had been made for me, and I was okay with it. I wasn't going to the wedding. Instead of feeling rejected, I felt free. I wasn't obligated to endure another day filled with drama and false pretenses. The days leading up to Rachel's wedding became a time of unexpected calm for me. I made a conscious decision to focus on myself, something I hadn't done in a long time. I reconnected with friends who made me feel valued and supported. These were people who genuinely cared about me, who never demanded anything in return. I also took a significant step toward healing by contacting a therapist through the counseling services at my university. I hadn't realized just how much I needed someone to talk to about not just the wedding chaos, but also the years of underlying tension between Rachel and me. The therapy sessions were a revelation, allowing me to finally unpack years of unresolved emotions. On the day of Rachel's wedding, I made plans with friends and avoided home entirely. I kept myself busy, filling the hours with laughter and activities that brought me joy. My phone remained untouched. I didn't want to know anything about what was happening at the ski resort where the wedding was held. It was no longer my concern. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of closure. The chaos, the drama, the constant emotional tug of war, it was all behind me. Rachel had made her choice, and so had I. It dawned on me that the wedding was just a trigger, the spark that ignited years of unresolved tension between us. Perhaps our relationship had been broken long before the wedding planning even began. After the wedding, I naively thought the drama might subside. I reasoned that once the wedding was over, the dust would settle, and maybe, just maybe, our family could begin to heal. But as it turned out, the fallout from the wedding was just as chaotic as the lead up to it. Rachel wasn't done stirring the pot, and the rest of the family was left to pick up the pieces. The morning after the wedding, my phone rang. It was my mother, and from the moment I answered, I could hear the strain in her voice. She sounded exhausted, the weight of everything that had happened clearly taking a toll on her. "Rachel's upset," she said, as if it were somehow my responsibility to fix things. I felt a mixture of anger, frustration, and a growing sense of resignation. Of course, Rachel was upset. She had always viewed any slight, real or imagined, as a personal attack. In her mind, my absence from the wedding was just another betrayal. "I didn't abandon anyone, Mom," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "Rachel told me not to come. She made that decision, not me." Mom sighed, clearly caught between her loyalty to Rachel and the reality of the situation. "I know, but you know how she is. She's emotional right now, especially since the wedding didn't go exactly as planned." That caught my attention. Apparently, Rachel's perfect fairy tale wedding had been anything but. There had been drama with the bridesmaids. The venue had botched the schedule, and the caterer had shown up late. One of her bridesmaids had even backed out last minute over a money dispute, while another had clashed with Rachel over her controlling behavior. In short, the wedding had been a disaster, and Rachel was looking for someone to blame. "She's just upset," Mom continued, "but she'll cool down in a few days." I wasn't so sure. Rachel had always been the type to hold grudges, and I knew this wouldn't blow over anytime soon. For the first few days after the wedding, she went completely silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. Part of me was relieved. Maybe, I thought, she had finally realized that I wasn't going to play her games anymore. But a week later, the silence was broken, not with a call or a message, but with a public social media post. Rachel had written a long, dramatic rant, painting herself as the victim of a family betrayal. She didn't name me directly, but it was obvious who she was talking about. She portrayed herself as someone who had been abandoned in her hour of need, with certain people, read me, having ruined her wedding by not supporting her. The post went viral within our extended family and friend circle, and soon I was receiving messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years, asking what had happened. Some, of course, took her side, asking why I hadn't been there for her. Others, who knew Rachel well, saw through the act and reached out to offer their support. But at that point, it didn't really matter what anyone else thought. What stung the most was knowing that my own sister had gone out of her way to turn the entire family against me, all to protect her fragile ego. In the weeks that followed, the tension within the family only grew. My mother, ever the mediator, kept pushing me to reach out to Rachel, to apologize and make things right. But I couldn't see what I had to apologize for. Rachel had been the one to uninvite me, to create drama where there didn't need to be any. My father, on the other hand, was more supportive. He didn't say much about the situation, but he made it clear that he was on my side. He understood that I hadn't done anything wrong and didn't push me to reconcile with Rachel. Family gatherings became unbearable. Rachel wouldn't even look at me when we were in the same room, and the atmosphere was always thick with unspoken tension. Even my younger siblings, who had always been oblivious to the family dynamics, could sense that something was wrong. Over time, I realized that this wasn't something that would be easily fixed, if it ever could be. Rachel had made her choice, and I had made mine. As painful as it was, I knew I couldn't keep trying to fix a relationship that was so clearly broken. Instead, I turned my focus inward. I threw myself into my friendships, my work, and my studies. Therapy helped me unpack years of hurt and resentment that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. It was liberating to finally talk about it all, to dissect the bitterness and frustration that had built up over so many years. My therapist helped me see that I couldn't control Rachel's behavior, nor was it my responsibility to fix our relationship. The only thing I could control was my own actions, my own healing. Slowly but surely, I began to let go of the guilt I'd been carrying for so long. Guilt for not being the sister Rachel wanted me to be. Guilt for not fixing the situation. Months passed, and life slowly returned to a new kind of normal. People began to see through Rachel's antics, and some extended family members even apologized for siding with her without knowing the full story. I came to terms with the fact that Rachel and I might never have the kind of relationship I once hoped for. But that was okay. I didn't need her approval or her companionship to live my life. When our older brother, who had been stationed abroad, came home for a visit, we had some deep conversations about the family dynamics. He admitted that even from afar, he had seen how Rachel manipulated situations to suit her narrative. It was validating to hear that I wasn't the only one who saw things that way. As for my mother, She finally began to ease up on the pressure to reconcile, though I could tell she still didn't fully understand why I had distanced myself. But she was starting to accept that some things couldn't be forced. I don't know what the future holds for Rachel and me. Maybe one day we'll reconcile, maybe we won't. But for now, I'm at peace with where things stand. I've learned to set boundaries, and I've learned that it's okay to walk away from toxic relationships, even when they're with family. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth isn't defined by anyone else's approval, least of all Rachel's.